So hello there and welcome to a brand new episode of the DNF1 F1 Podcast, a show where we take all of the latest news, gossip and events in the world of Formula One and we relay that back to you for your listening or viewing pleasure, depending on which platform you choose to follow us on. And of course, guys, it is the review of the Spanish Grand Prix and what a race it was, eventually won by Sir Lewis Hamilton, winning his 98th Grand Prix. A piece of strategic masterclass from the Mercedes team allowed Lewis to go for an unorthodox two-stop strategy to eventually reel in Max Verstappen, who for a long time seemed like he had the race in his grasp. But it wasn't to be for Max. And of course, the result means that Lewis Hamilton has extended his lead to 14 points in the Drivers' Championship over Max Verstappen, who indeed did get the fastest lap and managed to keep it this time, of course, managed to keep it within the track limits. And of course, during this race review, we are joined once again by my co-host, Mr. Courtney Pine. Courtney, how are you doing this afternoon?
Hello, everyone. Doing well. Looking back at the race, wasn't the most entertaining, but certainly made an interesting turn in the championship.
Absolutely right. And of course, we are joined by somewhat of a familiar face, although I can't recall if this is his first video podcast appearance on the DNF1 podcast. But it's my brother, Luke, or better known as one of the hosts of the 1892 Reds podcast. So, of course, if you are a football fan and indeed a Liverpool fan, I definitely recommend that you check out his channel on YouTube. Just go to 1892 Reds podcast for all things Liverpool Football Club. But, of course, today he's going to be here to offer his insight on today's Spanish Grand Prix in Formula One. Luke, first of all, how are you doing this afternoon?
Thanks for having me on, guys. It's the first time I've actually been on as a video episode, so it's actually good to get on. It's been a good weekend. Obviously, it was a good race in the end. Hamilton picking up a big win for him, and obviously seeing Liverpool win yesterday and West Ham lose today. It's been a good weekend so far for us. So yeah, all looking forward to talking about the race.
You just couldn't help yourself, could you?
Not at all.
I'm gonna interject. I'm so pleased that like a Liverpool fan is like really happy that West Ham lost. It just shows how far we've come as a club. That's all I'm saying.
Less said on that one, the better. Let's talk things Formula One, because that's why we're here, of course. But yes, as we've mentioned already, Lewis Hamilton winning the Spanish Grand Prix, as Courtney pointed out, definitely not one for the archives in terms of end-to-end action every lap. But I tell you what, it certainly had its moments and could prove to be a key moment in this season's Drivers' World Championship and perhaps the Constructors as well. But of course, let's get into this. Now, we don't normally talk about qualifying, but I think we can make an exception given the occasion and obviously the momentous moment that we saw on Saturday. Lewis Hamilton taking his 100th career pole position. Never been done before. Lewis unlocking the gold skin for the 100th pole position. And Courtney, I'm going to come to you first on this one. I mean, can you sum up how incredible an achievement like that is? I mean, it's never been done before. No one's got anywhere near close to it. Michael Schumacher being the closest after Lewis on 68. I mean, how can we sum up into words what Lewis has achieved in the sport, in particular for qualifying?
I think even the biggest fans of Lewis are probably running out of ways to compliment the guy. You know, it's what he's done. I mean, obviously, he's set a new benchmark for, you know, drivers of the future. Like 100 pole positions. It's just one of those things you have to like say over for it to really sink in, because he seems to do it almost effortlessly. And given this season that Verstappen in particular seems to have the fastest car on a Saturday, the fact that he's managed to pick up 2 pole positions already is immense.
Yeah, absolutely. And of course, we should point out that, as you mentioned already, Courtney, it does seem that there is a balance that we're starting to see this season where Red Bull in particular seem to have the faster car on the Saturday. And despite that, Lewis Hamilton still is able to pull out that lap out of the bag. Granted, probably not the perfect lap, but still able to do a better job than everybody else. It's an incredible achievement on that one. We're going to go into the race, of course. So let's get into that. Whilst we had that footnote on Lewis achieving 100 pole positions. I mean, Toto Wolff himself said that you can compile all of Lewis's laps and it would make a 2-hour feature film. So if there is anybody out there that does have 2 hours worth of footage of Lewis Hamilton's every single pole lap he's done in his F1 career, please, if you feel free to compile all that together, do let me know when you've made it, because I would absolutely love to sit down for 2 hours and watch all of those in use. Of course, sequential order, as of course, why else would we do it any different? But let's get into the race itself now. Going into this Grand Prix, of course, Hamilton, pole position, Max Verstappen, second place, Bottas, third. Very, very finely poised for a great race. It always seems to be those three at the front of the field at the start. And of course, those three making the headlines this season. Luke, having seen enough races this season, seeing the same pattern of Hamilton, Verstappen, Bottas, did you feel that Max Verstappen was going to be able to overcome the 2-on-1 Mercedes disadvantage that he was facing in this race? Or did you feel that Mercedes, it was inevitable that they were going to be able to use both cars for their strategy today?
That's a good point, because I think throughout the race, Perez started, what was it, 8th? He started, so obviously Red Bull straight away have got a disadvantage, as in the team game, obviously in the longer run during the race. There was, I think Martin Brundle picked it up, and I think Hamilton must have picked it up as he was doing the formation lap. There was a lot of rubber on that right side of the track, so it favoured Verstappen a lot, obviously at the start, and he got the better start compared to the two. And as you see, I think throughout the race as it went on, obviously they went longer, Red Bull, with Hamilton taking the gamble to pit, and obviously it paid off. But we're having Bottas in and around that area. It just clearly showed that Mercedes, the gamble did pay off, and you could clearly see if Perez was in and around where Bottas was, it could have been a little bit maybe different for Red Bull. Maybe their strategy could have been a bit different. But take nothing away from what Lewis Hamilton did today. It's just as Courtney picked out, it's just that this we're running out of words to how we're going to talk about Lewis Hamilton, how good he is. Can he overtake? Can he catch a longer margin? Because let's be real, 20 seconds with 20 so laps to go, that's a massive, massive gap to pick. And that Mercedes has always been known not to be the best car to be, trying to, when there's a car in front, the Mercedes isn't the best car to, catch, catch up. So, no, in that sense, yeah, I think maybe Red Bull got it a little bit wrong with the qualifying, but, again, take nothing away from Lewis Hamilton. Well-deserved victory today. And he's obviously extended his lead in the championship with that.
Well, it's a very detailed analysis, Luke. So thank you very much for that. But of course, we're not going to skip
in the family.
Yeah, a little bit. Yeah, I've got to say, we're not going to be skipping too far ahead. Of course, we're going to break this down bit by bit and talk about the key points of this race, particularly the battle at the front. Starting, of course, with the start of the race. Now, Luke, you've already pointed out that Max very much focusing on laying as much rubber down, cleaning up that right-hand side to get the best getaway possible. The F3 drivers in the earlier feature race were doing the same thing on that side, and Lewis had obviously noticed that side was a lot cleaner. So he was very much aware of the threat that Verstappen was going to carry off the line. And of course, that turned out to be the case. So Max got a great getaway, went into turn one, alongside Lewis, probably not a massive amount alongside, but certainly enough to go for the move. And he was very, very bold with that overtake, almost as if he knew that he had to make the move now or risk falling behind Lewis as the race progressed on. And of course, Max very, very aggressive into turn one and pretty much leaving it all down to Lewis to make sure to avoid an incident. Courtney, how did you see that incident? Did you feel that was about just on the limit of aggressiveness from Max Verstappen that was allowed, or do you feel perhaps he put too much emphasis on Hamilton to avoid a mistake?
I thought we was going to get a repeat of Imola, but what I must say, what I saw in Imola and what we saw at the beginning of this Grand Prix, we are seeing more and more the actual mutual respect and trust there is between these two drivers, because I don't think Max Verstappen would have done that with some of the other drivers further down the grid. So I think he knows that with some of the other drivers, it would have been hit by making that move. Because the way that Lewis kind of controlled the car to make sure it doesn't hit Max, but to have the momentum to make sure it doesn't get overtaken, was pretty spot on. And another thing I've noticed is the progress that Mercedes have made with their development. Because coming into this track, I honestly thought that Red Bull were going to dominate. I saw Max get ahead, and I thought, I reckon he's going to get away here. But for that Mercedes, like Luke has already said, that Mercedes tend to struggle like when they're behind. But actually, given what we thought could have been a Red Bull circuit, we saw the Mercedes actually keeping up with Max. And actually, towards the end of that first stint, Max was struggling and Lewis almost got the overtake.
Yeah, I mean, I'm glad you brought that up. I was going to ask this question at some point in this episode, but seeing as you brought it up, I'll ask it now. We've obviously established and already said that the Red Bull seems to be the better car in qualifying, at least at most circuits that we're going to see this year. And despite the fact that a lot of us, including myself, felt that Red Bull, this was a track where Red Bull would fancy winning this race, it does seem that now we kind of have a good idea that Mercedes seem to have a much better race car, at least in terms of what they can do with their race car versus what the Red Bull do. Would you agree that seems to be where we are now, whereas Red Bull have the qualifying car, Mercedes definitely have the race car?
Well, yeah, they're getting closer and closer. But even if you have a look at Imola, before Lewis's accident in the rain, he was keeping up with Max. And I reckon going into the end of that race, I reckon we could have been in a similar situation as we saw in Spain. So, yes, Mercedes have made improvements. They seem to be becoming more knowledgeable with the car. But it's certainly becoming noticeable that Mercedes have the better car on the Sundays. Very like reminiscent of the Ferrari in like 2017, 2018, where Mercedes had the advantage on the Saturday, but generally speaking, the Ferraris had the faster car on the Sunday.
Yeah, I was thinking the same thing exactly there. But yeah, it's a very good analogy. It definitely reminds me of that. And that's something that Red Bull are going to have to keep an eye on now, because they set up the car for Verstappen on Saturday to have a bit less downforce at the front, to kind of give him a bit more straight line speed. And I think they went with that today to try and fend off Lewis, but ultimately it didn't work out the way that race one went on. But as I said, let's talk about the first incident of this race, because Max and Lewis were very much getting away from everyone else. You could see that Max getting away, Lewis holding on to him. Charles Leclerc, of course, getting ahead of Valtteri Bottas. Now, of course, we're going to talk about Bottas's race, so we won't dwell on that too much. But let's move forward to the safety car that came out. Yuki Tsunoda, of course, caused that with some electrical issues with his car, which caused it to shut down, which brought out the safety car. At this point in the race, Luke, did you feel that anyone should try and make a pit stop to try and get rid of those softer tires and perhaps go for a different strategy today?
I was surprised Max didn't, to be quite honest with you. I know he had the race lead, and of course, coming into the pit stops, where is he going to come back out? More than likely, it would have been towards the back of the grid. But I think I was surprised a little bit that he didn't, because of the soft tyres. They'd have gone away a bit, obviously more than the medium tyres, of course. But I think at the same time, like where Red Bull had won that first initial battle at the start, I don't think Red Bull were really interested to give away track position, because, as you said, and as you pointed out, and I agree, Mercedes on a Sunday have the quicker car during race pace. And you see during that sort of first, moments of the race before the safety car came out, when Lewis was within a second behind Verstappen, he was always getting caught out with that dirty air. So maybe Red Bull didn't want to take the risk just there, but in that sense, probably, it was the right decision. And obviously when the safety car went back into the pits, Harry got away. He went out to that penultimate corner, the S corner before that last corner. Harry just got away. Was brilliant for Verstappen to build that gap again. Obviously going into that first round of pit stop. So yeah, probably the right decision at the time, but maybe a little bit surprised. Possibly someone else down the order could have took a gamble, but it didn't happen. So that was that, really.
Yeah, I mean, we saw the two Williamses, of course, double stacking to try and change the strategy, and ultimately that paid off for him a little bit. But they were really battling with the Haas's at the time. So, of course, we'll get into that a little bit later on. It's not much of a victory for them, if you like. But, of course, as you mentioned, Luke, yeah, it was a great restart from Max Verstappen, got away at the right time. He's had to do that a few times this season. He seems to be managing that rather well. It's strange, because usually this is the sort of thing we'd associate with Lewis Hamilton, Courtney, but I can't recall this season Lewis actually leading a race when the safety car has been out, and he's had to do that, at least from memory. I think Bottas has done it, and I think Max has had to do it twice himself.
Well, yeah, it highlights the fact that Max Verstappen is and will continue to be there the moment Lewis isn't on point, and it does seem that Lewis is relishing the challenge. So he knows that if he isn't in form, then Max will be taking the win and continuing to put pressure on him. But I said this in the last episode. It just seems that Lewis has polished his racecraft, and it seems on a Sunday, Max or Red Bull gonna have to find something a little bit extra to beat them and like to beat Lewis and Mercedes in this championship.
Yeah, absolutely. And with that in mind, let's fast forward to obviously the big moment in this race. Of course, both drivers did their stops. This was kind of triggered by Valtteri Bottas making his first stop of the race to try and undercut Charles Leclerc at Ferrari, which of course it worked because Ferrari decided to keep Charles out, probably in their mind, while Charles got a great start to get into P3, and he did brilliantly to keep Bottas back in that first stint, given how difficult it is to overtake at Spain. I was worried that Ferrari were going to be like sitting ducks with their power deficit, but it wasn't to be today. They obviously knew that they weren't really going to be competing with Bottas in that second stint, so they were just quite happy to let him go, knowing that they could probably keep hold of fourth and manage their race, which effectively they did. So, this ended up bringing up other people making pit stops. Lando Norris obviously went for an early stop. Ricardo, Perez followed as well, eventually. Then, of course, Max Verstappen reacted, and it did seem that Max was pretty much running out of tyres. I mean, Lewis was literally on him by the time Max went in. Max made his pit stop, but interestingly enough, Lewis Hamilton decided to stay out a bit longer, and he felt comfortable enough with the tyres to kind of stretch this stint out. Courtney, did you feel that this was the wrong decision at the time for Mercedes to make? Do you feel that they should have just reacted to Max to keep the pressure on him? Or did you feel like perhaps this may benefit Lewis later on as he may have fresher tyres at that point?
Well, yeah, watching on as a fan, I thought it was the wrong idea, but that's exactly why I'm not a Formula One strategist. It seems that yet again, the Mercedes strategists are doing a great job, even though Mercedes did seem to be the better car on track. So obviously that made the strategy a bit easier for them. But the fact they didn't just knee jerk, I think nothing worth remembering. We have noticed again that Red Bull have faster pit stops. So I think Mercedes have to bear that in mind when they come up with their strategy. So I think a knee jerk reaction, because obviously they didn't know that Max Verstappen was there was going to be an error in his pit stop. So with that in mind, Mercedes have to rethink it because they know that it's a lot more difficult for them to overtake Red Bull with a knee jerk, given that Red Bull have faster pit stops.
And today in particular was a rare occasion where Red Bull weren't perfect with their pit stops. It was 4.2 seconds, which is notoriously slow in Formula One, let alone for Red Bull. That's about 2 seconds slower than what they normally do at their pit stops, and that's still incredibly good. Dr. Helmut Marko put that down to a communication issue. Apparently, Max was supposed to have come in at that time, but there was a communication issue with the mechanics. Obviously, that's why they were a bit late, especially with that left rear tyre. The mechanic running around the back of the car with the tyre in his hands, not ready to put it on the car. So that's why they lost that time. Let's move on to the second stop. And of course, we had that stint where Lewis was behind Max. He was staying on his tail, but again, he got into that window where he was about a second behind Max, stuck in the turbulent air, and he just couldn't seem to find a way to breeze past the Red Bull. So Mercedes decided to flip the switch on this one. They brought Lewis in at a time where he was very close to Max and might have been able to overtake him at that point. He even said it himself. But they brought Lewis in to go for a bit of a different strategy. Now, for those of you that won't remember the 2019 Hungarian Grand Prix, Mercedes did a very, very similar thing. And they brought Lewis in to go for a two-stop and then get Lewis to come out on much fresher tyres and then hunt down Max Verstappen. At this point, Luke, given what I've just said about Hungary, where they did this before and pulled this off, and in a probably much stronger car compared to their competition than they did this season, did you feel that Mercedes had made a mistake or that Lewis had missed his best opportunity? Or did you feel that the inevitable feeling that I think I got when I saw this, and that was, oh, I think Mercedes have done Red Bull here with this? How did you feel about that?
I kind of thought a bit of both. I thought they made the right decision, but they didn't. The only reason I felt they made the wrong decision at the time was just because that was the closest that Lewis had actually got to Max before he'd actually went in the pits. It was only around half a second. So, he gets a good exit out the corner. If he stays out, I expect Lewis to pass him. I mean, the only thing you could mention in that regard was, I think it was Latifi in front of Verstappen. So, I mean, Max would have had DRS with Latifi, so that could have kept him out. But anyways, obviously that didn't happen. But when he went into the pits, Lewis, it was obviously a bold move to try that. I just felt that because of the turbulent area, he had so much problems in the first half of the race trying to get past him. I just felt Mercedes playing the mind games. They did it obviously in the first round of pit stops by keeping Lewis out when Max had pitted. So, Mercedes are, I hear at the time with Ferrari, with Leclerc, we're going plan B and then we're going plan C. Like, I think that's Mercedes, but they obviously just don't go ahead with all that. But I think when Lewis pitted the second time round, Max had to pit. He had to. And for me, keeping Verstappen out was a very brave, but I also think a very, very silly decision from Red Bull, considering what had happened obviously earlier in the race with the pit stop scenarios. I think if they pick Max Verstappen, I think he'll win the race, to be honest. But yeah, obviously they didn't. And obviously Lewis took full advantage, because I think there was a moment where I think he was around 3 to 4 seconds behind. And then they said about the tyre, Lewis was saying about his tyres were going. And then I can't remember who it was. I can't remember his name, Lewis's engineer. He come out.
Bono.
Bono, that's it.
Yeah.
He come out and said, yeah, your tyres might be fading away, but Max's will be absolutely worse. So it's like, Mercedes got that one right. So yeah, in my opinion, I think the second round of pit stops, I think Max should have definitely pitted the lap after Lewis came in.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, there seemed to be a window that at the time it seemed like Mercedes have got them here, and that this is going to happen again like it did in Hungary 2019. And that's what everyone was saying. But there did seem to be one lap that Red Bull had where they could have covered Lewis off. And at the very least, they'd have to go after Valtteri Bottas and then perform the overtake themselves. Corny, did you see it that way as well? Did you feel that, first of all, Mercedes had played a masterstroke at this point, trying to do what they did in Hungary 2019? And if so, do you feel that Red Bull had a lap to react, or do you feel that, perhaps it was, Mercedes had pulled the trigger and there was nothing that Red Bull could do?
I fully agree with what Luke said about the gap. Even the most confident Lewis Hamilton fan I see will go over 20 seconds. That's going to be a lot of work to do. But what I am noticing with the trend of this season is that we've all discussed that Mercedes are faster overall on a Sunday, but the advantage that Mercedes has seems to be larger the harder the tyre. So on the medium tyre, Lewis was ridiculously faster. And he had the advantage, he put on another set of mediums. So Mercedes had the clear pace advantage, particularly with the medium. So again, it just made the strategy a lot easier for them.
Yeah, no, absolutely right. But of course, as you mentioned, that gap, it was going down all the time. Max was encountering traffic, wasn't able to clear it as quick as he could. Of course, Hamilton had that very scary moment for Mercedes where Bottas was told that Lewis was there, and you'd expect Bottas to just get out of the way. But he didn't do it. If anything, he was actually defending his position at turn 10, which was quite a surprise for a lot of people. Thought both Mercedes are going to collide there. They're trying to win a race. But it didn't happen. And of course, Hamilton caught Verstappen. Brilliant move around the outside of turn 1. There was nothing really Max could do to defend. And the writing was on the wall. Hamilton obviously going home to win the Spanish Grand Prix, his 98th win of his Formula One career. He's getting close to that 100th win. It seems it could happen in Azerbaijan at this rate, which will be the Grand Prix after Monaco, which is where we're going next. So by the end of the month, Lewis Hamilton could have won his 100th race in Azerbaijan, of all places, a strange place to win it. But nonetheless, of course, an incredible achievement. As a summary, guys, I've got to say that this, for me, was a day where I think Red Bull felt that they needed to respond to what happened in Portimao. And I think the cold, hard truth is, are we already starting to see that, take strategy and everything else out of the equation, that Lewis may just have everything that he needs right now to be the dominant force in this season's championship? Or do you feel that there is still plenty that Red Bull can do to turn things around in their favour? Courtney, I'm going to come to you first on this one.
A couple things, need to be considered. We've still got, 19 races to go, like barring any cancellations. And another thing definitely worth considering is Red Bull have a big decision to make. Are they going to continue in a development war with Mercedes, or are they going to focus on next season? If they were to mainly focus on next season, like shall we say Ferrari are, I'd give Mercedes the championship. But given there might be a hunger within Red Bull to compete, I can't see them throwing in a towel just yet. But Monaco will be an interesting one. I think if Lewis wins in Monaco and gets, within that sort of 25 sort of like DNF comfort zone, then it's going to be quite difficult for Max to come back from that.
And on the subject of Max Verstappen, Courtney, as an additional question in this regard, how must he be feeling right now? Because for argument's sake, the only real mistake that he's probably made this season, if we don't include Bahrain round the outside of turn 1, turn 4, I should say. Let's say the track limit stuff, let's forget that. But other than the mistakes he made at Portimao, you could probably argue that Max hasn't really done much wrong so far this season, other than very, very, very minor things, which you can say happens to anybody. But is he starting to get this frustration building up inside of him where he feels that he needs his team to really deliver for him on strategy, on pit stops, and producing the best car that they can to give him the chance to beat Hamilton and Mercedes? Because right now, I think we're seeing a perfect combination, as we've known for the last 7 years, between Hamilton and Mercedes, whereas Red Bull, we're either seeing the team do well and the driver not do well, or the driver do well and the team not do well. There's just not that synergy going on right now.
Well, he must have mixed feelings because there's also that frustration. He might be feeling like so close but so far with some of these incidents. But at the same time, let's not forget how much of a step forward Red Bull have made. Yes, the slight regulation changes have helped, but Mercedes were in a class of their own last season. So for Red Bull to come back, and Honda have done great work with their performance to give them that edge on a Saturday. So Max has a package that can at least, put him in a position to challenge. It's just a case of where Red Bull go with their development. But I think overall, Max must be happy with how the season has started.
I know, absolutely. I think if there's someone that said to him, you'd have won a race and been in contention for pretty much every single race, but only been beat by Lewis, then I think he'd have been happy. But given how this season started for Red Bull, where it looked like they've got the car to win the championship, it does seem right now that may not necessarily be the case anymore. Luke, where do you see this? Do you feel that Red Bull perhaps are running out of time already to give Max what he needs to win this championship? Or do you feel that there's still plenty of time for them to overcome Mercedes, who, for lack of a better way of putting it, seem formidable right now with Lewis Hamilton?
There's still plenty of time. Of course there is. I mean, we're only, 4 races in? I mean, it's a long season. Obviously, as Courtney mentioned, hopefully there's no cancellations because we want a full season. I think Red Bull, again, agreeing with what you guys said, I think Red Bull have made huge steps this year to be able to compete with Mercedes. And it makes the sport so much better as well, seeing that extra, the 2 different power engines and 2 different teams up against each other fighting for a championship. Lewis Hamilton, of course, is going to be the favourite. He's going to be the man to beat. But I still expect Max Verstappen to come back. And as you said, Adam, I can't forget, you said about Lewis having that perfect combination. I mean, you've got your teammate that gets on the team radio, okay, it's James, let Lewis obviously that didn't happen today, but I'm just going back to that incident. I just think maybe Bottas made it look better. So Lewis, it was kind of half and half. Like Lewis overtook him, but at the same time, sort of peeled off a little bit. But apart from that, I mean, going back to what you said about the championship side of it, I expect Red Bull to be strong at Monaco. It's definitely going to be, for me, a track that will favour them. But yeah, I mean, it's one of those. If Max has a bad day at a retirement and Lewis obviously picks up the pieces, because let's be real, like Lewis Hamilton is the best at, when situations arise, it could be a safety car, could be a strategy change. Lewis is the best, and that's why he's won so many world titles in this era. So it's really important now that Red Bull win this next mini battle at Monaco, or it could be a lot harder for them to get back into the championship moving into that sort of next period of races.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Now, of course, we've been on quite a while with this first part of the race review, but let's talk about the number 2 drivers at those respective teams briefly before we move on to the others. Bottas's race today, Courtney, how would you sum up Bottas's race today? Because eventually he did get that P3, and he probably was quite a factor in Hamilton winning this race. Not necessarily holding him up a bit, but the fact that by him being there, Red Bull weren't exactly able to, how would you say, proactively go for the strategy Mercedes went for before Lewis did, because of the fear that he'd have to overtake another Mercedes. What would your thought be on that and Bottas's race in general?
Well, yeah, he's been the perfect number 2 driver. But for him personally, he doesn't want that, and the frustration is really starting to show. He knows that there's a good chance he's going to lose his seat, and as Luke has already stated, the way that he behaved in terms of with Lewis, one, he's either refused to listen to team orders, or he's tried to save face with the way that he's tried not to make it look like so obvious that it's happened. So Valtteri Bottas is starting to seem like a man that has sort of low confidence. Maybe he's already been told that he's going to be leaving. There's definitely been a change in mentality with him, but he's doing a job for the team. But again, he doesn't want to be a number 2 driver. Every single driver that comes into Formula 1, they want to be champions. So for him to be seen as a perfect wingman, it must be demoralising for him.
Well, yeah, absolutely. And that phrase has been often said about Valtteri Bottas ever since Toto Wolff said it a few years ago. Whether he truly believes that or not is a different thing. But I think we're seeing the value of having a driver like Valtteri Bottas in there as a rear gunner to Lewis. Did not necessarily being directly trying to fight Max Verstappen, the enemy, if you like, as he did in Portimao. Of course, that was good for Mercedes. But being in a position today where, despite the poor start and being stuck behind the Ferrari and all that first stint, when he was in clear air, he was close enough to the leaders to stop Red Bull trying to do what Mercedes eventually did, because Mercedes knew there was only one car they really needed to overtake, and that was Max Verstappen, where, of course, Red Bull didn't have that luxury today. And I bring this up as a relevant point because Red Bull have signed Sergio Perez with the idea that he was going to be for them what Bottas is for Mercedes. And as of yet, despite the room that we have to give, or the space we have to give Perez, knowing that, eventually he's going to come good, but that may be too late to wait on that happening. And today we saw that again. Perez didn't really qualify well this weekend. Of course, he was 8th, I believe he was, very poor qualifying, got stuck in the midfield. Eventually, when he managed to get free of Daniel Ricciardo, who he seemed to be stuck behind most of the race, he was nowhere near Charles Leclerc, let alone the top 3. So are Red Bull worried right now that, on top of the fact they may not have the car on the Sunday to beat Mercedes outright, but they clearly right now don't have a number 2 driver that can do for them what Bottas is doing for Mercedes? Luke, I'm going to ask you on that one. Red Bull, how they feel about what Perez is doing right now?
I think Sergio Perez, if you're comparing it to number 2 drivers at Red Bull over the last, say in the turbo hybrid era, I think he's probably been the best number 2 for a recent long while. I know it's early on, and I know today obviously this weekend wasn't his greatest weekend. We know how hard it is to get back up the field and overtake in Spain, but I think it is. We always mention about what is it with this number 2 driver at Red Bull? Like, why are they not able to, help Max Verstappen or help the team push on to get them victories? Because I don't think we've seen it with Red Bull since the days when when Vettel was there and Vettel was dominating. Mark Webber and Ricciardo were very good teammates with Sebastian Vettel. Ever since Sebastian went to Ferrari, Red Bull have had this downward spiral where they've not been able to have both drivers always competing at the top. They've tried it with, off the top of my head, obviously it wasn't really well for Alex Albon, for example. I can't remember obviously some other drivers at Red Bull, Danny Kvyat. Red Bull have tried everything really for me. I think Perez is probably the best driver on the grid to have at the moment as that regard. But if it doesn't work this season, in my opinion, go and sign Valtteri Bottas, because, if Bottas is a good number 2 driver and that's what you need, in my opinion, he will come available next season, as Courtney said. So hopefully Monaco, as I mentioned before, it will be a better race for Red Bull. So Perez might be a bit further up the order next week.
Yeah, it's worth talking about because of, as I said, we've got to give Perez leniency because he's still learning his way and he still believes that the car is very much driving him rather than the other way around. But I think to help his cause and to help what Red Bull are trying to do with Max, they do need their number 2 driver up there from the start, even if pace-wise he's not up there with the top 3. Being a solid 4th and being in a position where he could affect the strategy in the way that Bottas did today. Who's to say if Perez wasn't in 4th, say, 5 seconds behind Valtteri Bottas today, which is where pretty reasonable to suspect he'd probably be that far behind. I don't think Mercedes would have pulled the trigger on Lewis today. They might have done, but I think they would have had to think about that one a lot more. So, Courtney, if there's one area that Perez needs to really improve on in the short term, where would you feel that would be?
Now, I've been thinking as you two have been speaking on this topic, and I wonder, I think it's fairly well known that Red Bull, the car is set up to suit Max Verstappen, because obviously he's a star guy. He's clearly one of the most talented drivers on the grid. But we've seen now, 3-4 teammates, and they all seem to be faltering. I've just wondered if Red Bull are setting the car up to suit Max Verstappen. So, it's so much on Max Verstappen's side that it could actually be harming the setup for the team overall, because Perez is a very, very competent driver. He's known for great tyre preservation, and this season he's become an average driver. So maybe that's something Red Bull need to look into when setting up the car, that maybe it's a little bit more even to suit both drivers rather than favouring Max.
Maybe. I mean, I'm kind of leaning towards something that Perez can do himself. I think qualifying has to be the area that he has to improve on, because with this current set of regulations that we've had for the last 7 or 8 years, qualifying has been so important. And that if you qualify well, chances are you're going to get a good result in the race. And that Red Bull comfortably, at very, very least, should be finishing in the top 4. So if Perez manages to qualify better, and we know he can because he did it at Imola, he got on the front row there. Of course, the race went completely to pot afterwards. But if he can regularly qualify in those top 4 positions, that will be what Red Bull need. You know, he doesn't necessarily need to be fighting with Hamilton or Verstappen or Bottas, but just being there to be able to affect Mercedes' strategy in the way Albon did at Abu Dhabi last year. You know, that was what Red Bull, I think, have been looking for in a number 2 driver, the sort of thing that Bottas does regularly for Mercedes. And I think if they can get that in Perez, where he ups his performance in qualifying, which he's going to have to, that will go a long way this season for Red Bull. But as it stands right now, it does seem that until Perez gets up to that level with the likes of Verstappen and the 2 Mercedes, that Max is pretty much fighting the 2 Mercs on his own at the moment. I think that's what we feared in this championship, that may happen sooner rather than later. I'm going to move this on because, you know, we're going to be here all night talking about these 4 guys. And as much as we'd love to, I'm sure, you know, neither of us want to be here all day. Let's move on to some of the other races that was going on today. Let's talk about Ferrari. Now, Charles Leclerc has been pretty much one of the big unknown, well, not unknown, but one of the big silent stars this season, regularly in the top 4 in qualifying. I think this is the 3rd time he qualified in the top 4, and he had a great start today. Got ahead of Bottas, ran a very solid first stint, and I think himself and Ferrari knew that it would have took some doing to finish in the top 3 today. But he come home P4 in the end, very, very much ahead of Sergio Perez to remove that threat. Courtney, how would you sum up Charles Leclerc's performance, not just today, but this season in general?
Well, particularly today, it's an example of a driver getting the best out of the package he's been given. It looks like Ferrari have made some gains. It could partially be down to the setup of the track, but certainly that was the best that Leclerc could do, and that could give him some confidence going into Monaco, because he seems to be cursed in his own Grand Prix. So if Ferrari sort of carry on in the level that they are and they take that package to Monaco, I reckon he'd be very happy going to his Grand Prix in that kind of position. Yeah,
very much so. And I personally feel, you know, as I said, I'm a Ferrari fan, so it may sound a little bit biased in this regard, but I think today we saw something that I feel that is something that I've known, or I believe is the case this season, is that if you take all the engines out of the cars and you judge them based on the chassis and the car performance as a whole, I think Ferrari probably have the best package of everybody else, excluding the top 2. You know, there are so many different factors all the teams have. McLaren have a very strong car too, but I feel that Mercedes engine does tip the overall package performance in their favour. But I feel like the cars, you take the engine out, I think Ferrari have upgraded their car to a degree where they probably have the best car in the midfield. And I think Charles is doing a great job this season, and I think he's continuing that today. Carlos Sainz, a bit of a mixed bag for him today. I think he qualified relatively well in the top 6. Got bogged down at the start, but he went about his race relatively well, and eventually he managed to get himself into P7. He wasn't able to get Ricciardo in the end, so I think he'd be a little bit disappointed. But overall, another solid day for Carlos Sainz. Luke, how would you judge Carlos Sainz's start to his Ferrari career?
Yeah, I think Carlos Sainz is a steady driver. I've always rated him. Whilst he was at McLaren, his older days back in, was it Toro Rosso? I think he was at when he first started. I think he's a very good teammate to be alongside Charles Leclerc. Big respect to him today. I think Leclerc was fantastic. For me, I think he was probably the driver of the day, in my opinion. I think what he's getting out of that Ferrari, we all know Ferrari have not got the best car in the world. They're a lot better than what they were last season. But I do think that Carlos Sainz is definitely someone that Ferrari have got, which, looking to next season, if Ferrari are going to be back up there or there and abouts, I think the team that they've got, Sainz especially and Leclerc, I think Ferrari are going to do very well this season. I think Sainz was a little bit unlucky at the start, going down a few places, but Ferrari, they had a good strategy today, to get Sainz back up into a position where I think he'll take. Adam, I know we've watched races before and we've seen Ferrari always getting strategies wrong, in winning positions and sometimes in positions where they need to catch the cars in front, and that's not obviously worked. But I do think that Sainz has had a good, steady start to his life at Ferrari. And it could be another good weekend for them at Monaco. So, I think Sainz should be quite happy with his performance today.
Yeah, absolutely. And Courtney, obviously, care to share some thoughts on this, because now Ferrari have had a very strong weekend today and they're now 5 points behind McLaren in the Constructors' Championship. It does seem that those two teams in particular are the class of the midfield. How would you judge Carlos Sainz's day today at Ferrari?
No, I fully agree about Carlos Sainz, that it seems that Ferrari have a very good pairing there. So if they do really well with these regulation changes, they could be in a great position. And again, going into Monaco, I think they should be quite happy with their chances. Going into Monaco, the performance, the raw performance of the car is as important, because it's a street circuit, a very tight street circuit at that. So Monaco could be a big opportunity for Ferrari to pick up some serious points. And if there's a messy race, they could be in a run for a podium.
Absolutely. I've said that Charles could get a podium sooner rather than later, and I think he's been very close. A race like Monaco, if he nails it in qualifying and keeps his nose clean, which has been harder for him to do than it has been in previous years, there's every chance it could happen. So we'll have to wait and see. Let's talk about McLaren. A brilliant start to the season that McLaren have had. Obviously, a lot of stuff going on with their car. They've done a great job to integrate this new Mercedes engine with the limitations that they face to produce a very, very competitive package. I still feel the overall package still the best of the rest, just ahead of Ferrari when we take all that into consideration. Daniel Ricciardo had I'd say he's probably his best weekend for McLaren. He's probably a little bit disappointed that he fell away from the likes of Leclerc and wasn't able to keep up with Perez in the end. But overall, I think a solid performance from Daniel Ricciardo. Courtney, are we seeing step by step more improvements that Daniel was making, and perhaps we're starting to see Daniel feeling at one with the McLaren?
Well, yeah, I've said previously, I think it's only a matter of time before Daniel Ricciardo gets to grips with the car. Today was certainly a good start for him. Bit of a quiet weekend for Lando, but at the end of the day, these guys are all human. They can't be on top form, or unless you're Lewis Hamilton or Max Verstappen, that is. You can't be on top form every single week. And I think McLaren are another team. We just said about Carlos and Charles. I think McLaren have another solid driver pairing. I'll just get the feeling in the coming years, I think Ferrari and McLaren really do have the possibility to be going right up to the top, given the development of the cars seem to be going in the right direction, particularly in new regulations. And again, they've just got two very competent driver pairings. So again, I think if both of these teams carry on going the way they are, I think they could be in the mix with these big regulation changes that are coming.
Absolutely. And right to point out with Lando Norris, it wasn't really the best weekend for him. It was, I suppose, best way of putting it, not bad, but tepid compared to how good he's been so far this season. You'd almost say he seemed a little bit out of place, but, given the start that Lando's had this season, I think we can forgive him for a weekend where he wasn't spectacular. he was good, but just not his weekend. So, I'm sure he'll come back strong in Monaco and plenty of races in the future, but it's really shaping up this battle between Ferrari and McLaren, I must say. Luke, how would you judge McLaren's weekend and also their starts of the season so far?
I think McLaren, again, I think the end of last season, they finished off really well. I think, was it Sainz picked up a podium near the end of last season? Was it the season before? I can't remember. But, I think McLaren race by race are getting stronger and stronger. Ricardo, again, I agree with what Courtney said. I think it was probably his best weekend for McLaren. I think Norris was just going around as a Sunday drive today, to be quite honest with you. I just don't think it was, I don't think the car, it didn't, for me, sort to the circuit with the car that he had today. But, it's a points finish. I think, is he fourth in the championship? I think he's a few points in front of Leclerc. Both McLarens have made a good start to the season. Lando Norris, especially, as well. Again, it raises the debate again for next year whether I expect Norris to stay at McLaren, but if McLaren, with Ferrari coming forward with that big midfield battle, if they decide next year if they're going to be competing a bit further up, Norris is going to be the main person going into that battle. But yeah, no, I mean, apart from that, I think McLaren have done pretty well this weekend anyway. Double points finish, you can't really complain with that.
No, absolutely. And in the end, 6th and 8th is not necessarily bad, even though your rivals, Ferrari, are 7th and 4th. That happens. And McLaren have had the better results so far this season than Ferrari had. So I don't think they'll mind too much today, as long as they can obviously put things right in their favour. But it's really, really good to see those two teams in particular battling each other. We just wished it would be for the top positions rather than third. But I'm sure 2022 will bring up more of those surprises next season. Let's move on to Alpine. Very, very mixed day for them. Esteban Ocon, brilliant qualifying from him to get 5th place. But it seems that the race pace of the Alpine isn't really where perhaps it was in Portimao by comparison. They've certainly made a step forward, but it does seem that they are probably the next best team after McLaren and Ferrari. Courtney, what would you make of Esteban Ocon's day? Because he started off relatively well, got a decent start. He was really fighting away with the likes of Ricciardo and Sainz and Perez. But as the race went on, it did seem to fall away. And eventually he did get caught by Lando Norris. And they managed to hold on to 9th position for Alpine. Would you say that was a good result for Ocon today?
Yeah, because to be honest, I think that's where Alpine are as a team. Like, it was very encouraging from last week. They seem to have fallen back again. And what we're probably starting to see here is a 4-tier system in this year's championship. Mercedes and Red Bull at the top. Then you have McLaren and Ferrari, generally speaking. And then you've got this gaggle of midfield teams in the 3rd tier, Alpine being one of them. And then Haas at the very back. Because we saw towards the end of the race how you had like 4 or 5 cars from 3 or 4 different teams battling that flat final point. So it seems that lower end, that midfield, they sort of seem to be very, very close performance-wise. And look, at the end of the day, it's going to give us more entertaining racing, so it's all good.
Absolutely. And Esteban Ocon doing a great job once again. I mean, we've said for a few weeks now that Ocon has had to raise his game this season, and we've seen hallmarks of that. But it seems the last couple of races, he started to become more of a prominent figure in the Grand Prix for good reasons. And I suppose it would be fair to say right now he is single-handedly flying the flag for the Alpine team, which is exactly what he needs to do.
Yeah, I mean, it's going to be difficult for them because there's been all these rumours about Gasly joining them next season. But actually, in terms of performance, there's actually no reason for them to move Ocon on at this point. So it'd be very harsh at this stage if they were to replace him with Gasly.
Absolutely. And it would make sense to. Perhaps if there's one driver, and another thought I would say this, that they may have to look at what they do longer term with him, is Fernando Alonso. Once again, it does seem that, against our better wishes, I suppose, of the Fernando coming back to Formula One, it does seem that he's just not able to get the pace out of this car compared to his younger and less experienced teammate Esteban Ocon. Luke, do you feel perhaps that we're starting to see the first signs that this return from Fernando Alonso may be a bad idea? Perhaps, all due respect, perhaps worse than the Schumacher return for Mercedes. How do you feel things are going for Fernando?
I just couldn't believe at the end of the race where he finished. Was it 17th? I think in the end, Fernando.
It was only the two Hasses that finished behind him.
I mean, don't get me wrong. I mean, he probably just gave up in the end because there was that bit of a battle. Was it the last 5 or 10 laps? I think there was a scuffle for that last point. And in the end, I was just bringing back the flashback memories of him on the radio saying FP2 engines or something like that.
Yeah, GP2, yeah.
GP2, that's it. But yeah, I mean, as a fan's point of view, of course, you want Fernando Alonso in the sport because, multiple time world champion, his character, he's a great driver. He'll always be a Formula One legend. But did we really expect Alonso to be, pushing sort of further up the field? I don't know. Maybe being out of sport for a long time does affect it. But obviously to be behind Ocon for this race today, and his home Grand Prix as well, which would be a bit more disappointing for him. But there's no question that Fernando can easily bring it back for the next race and future races to come. So it's a disappointing result for him today. Fortunately, he finished in front of both Hasses today, so that'd have been a bit more embarrassing for his performance today. But I expect Alonso to come back Monaco and to do well. But and especially he does need a big performance to be in front of his teammate next week. But fair play to Ocon for his result today.
Yeah, I mean, there's no questioning Fernando's drive and determination to try and get the most out of this return to Formula One. He himself, whilst hopeful that he could be in a car that could compete for podiums and race wins and maybe even a championship in 2022, it does seem right now that perhaps we are starting to see that you need to have a bit more than just determination and everything else. At his age and obviously, coming back to the sport after a few years out, it does seem that perhaps he's not able to extract that extremely high level of performance that we're so often associated with Fernando Alonso. Courtney, I mentioned the return that Michael Schumacher had in the Mercedes, which of course wasn't as spectacular as we all hoped it would be, with the exception of perhaps Valencia in 2012, where he got the podium there, and of course pole position at Monaco, which was taken away from him. Is there a fear that we may end up going down something similar to a degree where we just don't want Fernando's legacy to be tarnished by this, but there's a fear that it could potentially be?
Well, yeah, I mean, you can't just base it on one performance, but if he carries on like this, then we are going to be seeing similarities to Schumacher's turn, because he must be approaching 40 now.
Yeah, I think he's 39. Surely. He's younger than what Michael was when Michael came back. So I think Michael was 41. So, but that aside, yeah.
So, there are hallmarks there, but yeah, as like Luke already stated, like you don't want to be seeing like drivers like that sort of go out the back door in that way. So hopefully he can turn it around, because it looks like we do have an exciting midfield battle there. So you want to be seeing all these drivers on top of the game. It just seems like that generation, I think, like sort of our main generation, sort of like the Lewis Hamiltons, Sebastian Vettels, Fernando Alonso. It's sad just to see drivers that were like at the very top a few years ago, sort of like struggling down towards the bottom.
Mm-hmm. That's why Arsenal won't go back for Arsene Wenger. They don't want to ruin his tarnish his legacy.
Well, don't speak too soon. But that being said, yeah, I mean, it's weird because we talk about Lewis, and Lewis is 36, so he's not that much younger than Fernando Alonso. But it shows the quality of driver Lewis is, and what it takes, I suppose, to be consistent and dedicated in a sport like Formula One. You can't just walk away from it and then come back. I mean, Raikkonen did for a season, and obviously, we ended up with a second coming, if you like, of Kimi Raikkonen. But in this case, perhaps I don't want Fernando to have to end his career in the way that I fear that this may go. But unless Alpine produce something that really works for him in 2022 and he can perform on a regular basis at the level that Ocon clearly is showing at the moment, there is that fear that could be the reality. There's hope for better days for Fernando, but it certainly was not the homecoming that he would have expected today. Let's talk about AlphaTauri. Again, a mixed bag for them, because, I said on the preview that there was a fear that AlphaTauri may have already missed their best opportunity at getting big points this season. And it does seem that may be the case. But nonetheless, Pierre Gasly, once again, for the second race in a row, managing to sneak into the points, despite having a strange race for Pierre Gasly. He started the race outside or a little bit ahead of his grid slot, which got him a 5-second time penalty, ended up at the back of the field because of a long pit stop under the safety car. But that being said, he fought his way through the field rather well and was rewarded with a point. Say not a bad end of the day for him, Courtney, would you say?
Well, yeah, Gasly's another driver that's getting the very best out of the package that he has, and obviously given the circumstances that he went through. Oh, sorry about that. Given the circumstances that he went through, technical issues. Yeah, given the circumstances he went through, he done well. But Pierre Gasly's in a stage of his career where he must be thinking, am I going to get another shot at a big team? Because right now, he's sort of in the middle of nowhere. And really, at this stage, he should be looking at a big move because he has the ability. We saw it in Monza last year. And I just hope he's able to get a big move because he's recovered from the troubles he had at Red Bull. So yeah, he definitely deserves another go with a big team.
Yeah, he's very much gone under the radar this season, Pierre Gasly, and that may not necessarily be a bad thing, but I'm sure that there are people very much watching what he does this season with the consideration perhaps bringing him into their team next season. We'll have to wait and see how things go, but there's going to be so much speculation regarding his future, you can tell. So hopefully Pierre's able to keep that up. Luke, I'm surprised you managed to contain yourself there with that moment from Courtney, where he's, for the benefit of those listening on instead of watching this podcast, Courtney's camera dropped on the floor. So he was obviously adjusting that whilst being professional and carrying on with his analysis, which was always good for me. I'm surprised Luke just didn't react and go, whoa.
Listen,
No, I was expecting it.
It was either that, or to be honest, it was one of two things. It was either, Arsenal season just crumbling down. I have to get the football point in. Or secondly, Courtney, you put your camera in front of a line. He's afraid he's going to get a penalty like Gasly did today. Obviously, parking his car there. It's probably where your camera.
And Fernandez gets to take it. Yeah,
Fernandez. Just quickly my point on Gasly. I think, as Courtney mentioned, if the debates with Alpine for next year, it'd be harsh for Ocon because I think Ocon's done very well. But I mean, is it right probably that Alpine would want a double French team like Ocon and Gasly next year? So if Alonso does move, that could be something that they would want. Possibly, I mean, Tsunoda was a bit unlucky today. Obviously, the engine just cutting out on him. That's a way moment, literally as he's driving along, it just cuts out. Because it happened to Leclerc, didn't it? Was it last year? Like at the end of So there must be a curse in Spain. It just picks someone and the engine just cuts out. But overall, I mean, Gasly will take a points finish. That 5-second penalty was bad for him because he could have maybe finished a bit further up the field. Difference in strategies maybe, but hopefully AlphaTauri, they'll pick up the pieces in the next race and they'll be higher up the field, which I think they should be, to be honest.
Yeah, I mean, Yuki Tsunoda, you just mentioned, obviously not a great day for him. Hasn't been a good weekend for Yuki Tsunoda. I mean, he was brilliant in Bahrain, pre-season testing. He was a star. But as the season has gone on in its early stages, it seems that there are some frustrations and a lot of angst behavior coming from him, to the point where he was very vocally on the radio criticizing the car after qualifying when he didn't get through Q1 to such a degree where it was quite uncomfortable to listen to. And you're just thinking, Yuki, you can't be saying those things in your rookie season. And we love Yuki. He's certainly not shy. He certainly wears his heart on his sleeve, but I think he needs to be a bit more mindful about what he says in those heat of the moments, if you like. He had to release a statement to apologize for what he said, but what happened in his race certainly would not have helped him. I'm aware of time, so we'll move on to the next team. Let's talk about Aston Martin. Now, Aston Martin brought upgrades to Portimao to help Stroll. And then, of course, they brought the other upgrades for Vettel for this weekend. Qualifying, it did seem like perhaps they might be on the fringes of the top 10 and perhaps maybe challenge in the race. Ultimately, despite the best efforts of Lance Stroll and Sebastian Vettel, once again, they came home pointless in this race. Courtney, I'm going to ask this question again because I feel like I'm going to be asking this on a regular basis until Aston Martin announce this formally. But are we already at the point where Aston Martin may have to sacrifice the rest of this season and concentrate on 2022 in order to be at the front? Because unlike Mercedes, they just cannot seem to get on terms with these new regulations. And they're a long way from competing from where we expected them to be in the top three teams.
I look at Aston Martin and also Alfa Romeo. This season, they're probably the most forgettable teams out there. They're probably like making the least impact on the championship, even with Sebastian Vettel and Kimi Raikkonen driving for those two teams respectively. You almost forget that they're there. You know, like obviously we're going to Williams a little bit later. They have like moments where they're flirting with like the top 10 to be a big headline maker. Yeah, for Aston Martin, you know, we all know the regulations hurt them and they're not happy about it, but they are having a really forgettable season. I think pointless is probably the best way to describe it, actually, Adam. You said pointless. Their performance today was pretty much pointless.
Yeah, no, that's fair way. I mean, Luke, anything to add on that regarding Aston Martin?
Courtney, you summed it up, mate. I mean, I just, everyone was expecting Aston Martin, as you said, to be up there and fighting for points. I mean, today you're right; they were fighting for that last point at the end, but again, just I forgot they were driving today. I didn't realise that Stroll and Vettel were out there. I was waiting for Vettel to make a mistake to actually say that he's out there, you know, because that's how it was today, to be honest, to see if he was still. But all jokes aside, very, very disappointing weekend for Aston Martin. And they do need to pick it up in the next few races. Otherwise, yeah, I agree with you. Maybe next year is the way to go for them.
Yeah, I mean, they were in the gaggle of cars fighting for a point towards the end of the race. Ultimately, they were unsuccessful. Stroll very nearly getting there. He had that incident, of course, where he went very wide trying to overtake Alonso. Then he had to let him back through, but not quite following the rules in terms of how to rejoin the track. Ultimately, as far as we're aware, and they might have updated the news on this since we recorded this, but he got away with it. But again, unsuccessful. I mean, one thing I'm missing, and I don't mean this to be a meme or a parody or anything, but I am missing those messages from Sebastian Vettel complaining about blue flags. I never thought I'd miss it, but strangely I do. So hopefully Aston can get themselves up the field. I mean, you know, we do the end of season reviews and we talk about who the biggest disappointment is going to be. I have to say they're pretty much the leading candidates for that.
Absolutely.
And the only championship they're going to be winning this season, or the only contest they're going to be winning this season, is a beauty contest with their car, because it's certainly not as quick as it is good looking, unfortunately. So hopefully for better days for them. Let's skim through. You said pointless. Not really too much to make on Alfa Romeo's race today. Raikkonen was on an alternate strategy today, ended up finishing 12th. So again, Kimi, solid as Kimi is, even though we do suspect it will be his last season in Formula One. Giovinazzi, very good in qualifying, getting into Q2 for the first time this season. So congratulations to him on that. But his race was, again, very, very tepid for most part, except for when he pitted under the safety car. One of his tyres was punctured as they were about to put it on. So the mechanic had to run back in with his tyre and then come out with another one. He'd lost about 40 seconds. But if you're going to have a bad pit stop like that, you're going to do it under a safety car. So unless either of you have got anything to add on Alfa Romeo, I'll skip through to the next team.
The puncture was the highlight of their race. Very forgettable yet again.
I forgot.
I wanted in that situation. I wanted obviously the race at the start was okay with, you know, the overtake at the start, but I just wanted one of them to fall over. I really did. As they were going to get the tyre, I just wanted something to happen there. But yeah, it was disappointing for Alfa Romeo. Giovinazzi was unlucky there, but yeah, another one of those. Like, I forgot they were there today, to be honest. But we can't think about Kimi and, you know, his radio, as you spoke about, Adam, with radio with Vettel. I mean, Raikkonen is just the highlight of it, and we're not going to repeat it. But the video about you miss Pele. Oh God, yeah. I love Kimi.
Yeah, I mean the Kimi highlight reel is going to be more about stuff he says rather than stuff he does in the car. You'd never think he was a Formula One driver, but yeah. I mean, I will say for context, guys, for those of you who are wondering why Luke mentioned someone falling over, not that we want to see people do that. Luke's favourite Grand Prix in Formula One history is the 2011 Canadian Grand Prix.
Best race of all time.
2 reasons why, and it has nothing to do with Jenson Button's drive to win on the final lap from where he started. 2 reasons. One, there was a safety car period where one of the marshals fell over and had to jump on the floor. Twice. He had to jump out of the way to avoid, I think it was Nick Heidfeld or one of the Marushas back in the day then. And the second reason, because there was a shot where there was a cameraman, and when you go to the races in America and Canada, you see a lot of the celebrities or the movie stars or singers and that always come out in their hordes every year. And I think this year, we had Rihanna walking through the pit lane whilst we were, I think like during one of the safety car periods or something like that. And Rihanna was walking through in the paddock, and there was a cameraman walking backwards as he's filming her, and he fell over as well. And that was caught on F1 TV as well. Luke sent me those videos on an average of once or twice a week.
It's such a shame that Canada's not a race this year, because you'll be getting them videos all the time.
Oh my god! Like he sent them to me as if like I've never seen them before. I'm like,
Are they sent without context? Because I hope they're sent without context. You just randomly get.
Well, I mean, if you don't know what I'm talking about, just look at the 2011 Grand Prix. Just type Marshall falls over. I'm sure someone's put it on YouTube because Luke's found the video. I'll leave a link if you like to that video if you're interested. Anyway, let's move on to the final teams. Williams. I mean, we said in the preview, Corny, that this could potentially be a race where Williams might do well with their peaky downforce philosophy. And there was a moment in the race where, despite things looking bleak for Williams, George Russell was half a second off Alonso fighting for the points.
I saw that.
Where the hell did that come from?
But then you looked a couple of laps later and he was down to 15th.
Yeah, he just got bogged down by that gaggle of cars fighting, unfortunately for George. But I mean, where do Williams go this season? Because it seems that their philosophy already looks pretty flawed. And we suspected it would, but I don't know. As more races go on this season, I know it's still early days, I feel like they're going to be battling Haas more often than battling for points this season. It's already happening. I mean, the first stint of the race, neither of them could get past Mick Schumacher until the safety car.
Oh, don't. If they're down there with Haas, then I think Williams should just completely give up and look at next season. It just seems like George Russell's cursed. It really seems he needs to get out of that team, because his reputation's going to start becoming damaged if Williams keep on performing like this.
Yeah, there is a worry. And Latifi, again, finishing 16th. I don't think we could have expected more than that. But it just seems that Latifi does what he needs to do for Williams. But right now, it's hard to say where the performance of that car is right now. I mean, perhaps Williams do need to look for the future drivers. Like I was talking on a podcast the other day that mentioned Roy Nissany, but of course, Roy Nissany needs to get that super license, which he doesn't have yet. So maybe Jack Aitken or Dan Ticktum, might fancy a go next season. It might be a good option to look at them too, maybe, if George Russell moves on to Mercedes, like a lot of us feel he would. Let's round this off with Haas. Mick Schumacher, once again, probably did the best that he could have done in this race. Wouldn't you say, Luke?
Yeah, I think Mick Schumacher, as Courtney said earlier, I think he's trying to get the best out of that car, and hopefully next season, if he's not at Haas, he might jump with Alfa Romeo if Raikkonen retires, or it'd be a good move for him. But Adam, I do have to bring it up because history, as you say, about my favourite races. I think Williams should be a bit disappointed because 2012 Maldonado winning that race, it's obviously something that would not. I mean, brilliant race that was.
How could I forget the GOAT himself?
If you've not seen Maldonado's greatest achievements, please go on YouTube and just.
I'm not putting down links for every single video we recommend here. That's going to get copyrighted and everything else. Just
in all seriousness, I think. Just going to your point, Courtney, very quickly about Williams, I think George Russell will be a Mercedes driver next year. So I don't think he'd have nothing to worry about for me. But with Haas, we've got the new Maldonado in Mazepin. Again, just goes around and just does what he likes.
Gets people's way.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah, and then Toto Wolff, you hear it? I've never heard that before.
Yeah,
I've never seen that graphic before. But do you know what? As soon as I saw it, I thought, yeah, I know who this is about. Toto Wolff's going to talk about Mazepin. I'm like, do you know, the guy gets a lot of criticism. Whether he deserves it or not is up for debate. I'm not going to weigh in on that argument. I think we've said enough on that. But this was a guy that said, "I just let my talking do the let my driving do the talking." And it's not really a lot. It's not a good thing at the moment. What's going on? He's for a guy that I think a lot of people believed he was going to be a danger to some people because of what he was going to do in a slow car. The last couple of races, he's starting to show that. And I feel like, hopefully it gets better. And with enough practice, it probably will. But he's not doing himself any favors. The best thing he can do is what Mick's doing, and just get his head down, drive his race. And, you can do a lot of good just by keeping a clean nose and just driving the race well. I mean, we're talking Alonso in the Minardi back in 2001, Senna in the Tolman in the early 80s. you know, drivers like that, when they start off in those cars where the back of the field, you can still do a lot of good by just keeping a clean race and doing well and improving bit by bit. And that's what Mick Schumacher is doing, very much so. Really impressive stuff. But Mazepin, once again, not only is he proven to be a bit of a burden to some drivers, but he's also slow. I mean, what was it, 50 seconds behind his teammate today?
God, that's embarrassing.
Yeah, that's not a good sign. He very much struggling towards the end of the race as well for managing his tyres. But as I said, I digress on that. I think this is as good as time to wrap this up. We've got the Monaco Grand Prix, of course, in 2 weeks' time. So a bit of a break. And of course, we will have a podcast for you very, very soon in between all that before the preview. Of course, thank you to our special guest, Luke, joining me on the podcast from 1892 Reds podcast. And make sure to check them out if you're a Liverpool or even a football fan themselves. Definitely check them out on YouTube. I'll leave a link below in the description. And of course, Courtney, thank you for joining us once again on the DNF1 F1 podcast and co-hosting with me.
Always a pleasure, mate. Always a pleasure.
Brilliant stuff. And of course, guys, for those of you who are just subscribing to the channel, thank you so much for everyone who has recently joined the DNF1 family. We're hoping at some point to get to 1,000 subscribers. It might be a bit ambitious target by the end of the year, but we're very close to 300. So please, 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 if you haven't already, please consider hitting that subscribe button, like the video if you have enjoyed it. But until then, guys, thank you so much for tuning in. Please stay safe, and we will see you in the next episode of the DNF1 F1 podcast. Take care.
See you soon.